Instagram's been quite good for you, hasn't it, Pat?
Instagram has, yeah. I mean, I didn't know much about it, to be honest. I had an account, a private one, and then before all of this, I set up, when I moved to Notting Hill, an account that I just wanted to be public facing and for the parish, and the Portobello Road runs through my parish. So I set up an account called the Portobello Priest, and I started out sort of going on the streets playing a hymn and a prayer as the Portobello Priest. But then one day it posted an interview with the Associated Press, I think. The journalist happened to rebrand me as the Portable Priest, and I read it and I was like, oh no, she's got that wrong. But then I actually thought about it and was like, actually that's a better name for what's currently going on. So, and by that time it's too late anyway. I think this had gone out to hundreds of media outlets, so it's like, I better rebrand myself. So Portobello Priest went to the Portable Priest.
That's great. You've got more nicknames, I think, than any other vicar I know. So the Portable Priest from the Portobello Priest. The Daily Mail have called you the Hot Priest, and I saw on the BBC the other day that they're calling you Priestman Pat.
Priestman Pat, a lovely play on Postman Pat by Sally Phillips, of course, from Alan Partridge days. I mean, when I first went on the Sunday Morning Live show and she got me to sing the first verse of Amazing Grace, I mean, that was, well, I was about to say a high point. It might have been more low points in my career so far, but wonderful to meet her, as Partridge is one of my childhood heroes, comedy heroes. But I started, and without any warning, she launched in with, I call you Priestman Pat. And I didn't quite know how to respond to that, but I just took it on the chin.
Was that intentional, do you think, to catch you off guard? Because you then went to talk about humor and how humor can be used in certain situations to relieve tension or disarm someone. So do you think that was intentional?
I think what I noticed, because we did rehearse, they get you to rehearse. So I read the Sunday paper, well, not Sunday, the papers and the stories that week with Sally and Sean and a comedian, Jen. And they get you on to rehearse, 45 minutes before, just to go do a read through, just because they found that they didn't used to rehearse and it was very natural, the chat. But often people hadn't thought through what they're going to say or hadn't thought through any jokes. So it was a bit wooden. So then they started rehearsing. But even Sally, she didn't rehearse that. So she launched that on me live. And you can see from my facial response that I was like, oh, that's interesting. Not sure I give it my blessing, but we'll roll with it. So I definitely think,
extremely well, I have to say, and I love that. I love the conversation you were having about starting off with a joke, and then I think your co-guests came in and said, apparently it's good. No, it was Sally, wasn't it, that came in and said, actually, it's really good to start with a bad joke, yes. Which gave me great reassurance, because probably as the oldest member of the three of us, my dad joke ability is unquestionable. So I know all about dad jokes. So I'm going to take that as a positive, I think, when we go forward.
Yeah, we all took comfort from that. And they misunderstood my first joke when I joked about a lot of failed stand-up comics become vicars. And Sally was like, that's not how you started, is it, Pat? And I was like, no, it's not. But this is a case in point. My first joke is failed on national TV, so there we go. But it was great.
Actually, can I come back on you on that, because there's something in there about Sally in that instance not quite appreciating the audience, or your joke not being quite resonant in the audience that was Sally at that time. How do you make that connection? This is probably a great place to start, actually. How do you go about making that connection with so many different audiences, given this year you've been putting yourself out there and very much outside your local sort of local comfort zone, and spreading the word to a much wider audience? How have you managed to do that?
Well, I think you just have to sit back into and rest in the reality that, of course we live in extraordinary times, 21st century, things have changed beyond recognition from the times of Christ, let's say 2,000 years ago. But what hasn't changed is the human heart, and the challenge is facing humanity, and even before Jesus, Aristotle, Plato, all the great philosophers, thinking through the nature of life and existence and reality is like, it's a shared experience. We have a shared, just life. And I think the hook is always just recognizing and articulating something that is common to all of us. You know, we all worry about loved ones, family. We all have hopes for the future. We all have anxieties and fears and stuff that goes on in our hearts. And as soon as you are sort of talking about something real that is just a human experience, that's a hook that transcends borders, you know, nationalities, cultures, and even ages. I mean, it is, you know, C.S. Lewis said, the heart of the problem is the problem of the human heart, which Christ came to fix, of course, but it's always remained the same problem, and the same great things and the same challenges have always remained the same throughout history. So actually it's easier than you think to hook people in, as we all, you know, we all breathe the same air.
And is that particularly apparent now? I mean, here we are in an international pandemic. I think there's something about when you first started becoming the portable priest, and going out to spread the message. It was the summer. It was the lockdown. We were all in this together. So much has changed, hasn't it, in the last sort of 3 or 4 months? You know, here we are at the beginning of winter. I suggest people's level of hope is probably different to what it was in the summer. How have you noticed that?
Well, I think, yeah, when I reflect back on what happened, and so just for the benefit of your listeners, I started going out on the streets with a sound system, a big 1K sound system, just taking a hymn and a prayer, a favorite hymn of the church, Amazing Grace, leading people in the Lord's Prayer, and a time of silence to just bring to mind or bring in prayer if you have faith. And I never pressured people, you know, whether people have faith or none, that was fine. But I started going on the streets, and people just opened up, and they were far more vulnerable than what we normally get if we ever try things on the street, which occasionally the church does. And I liken it, gave it some thought, you know, yesterday, and I sort of liken it to, you know, the story of Achilles, of course, you know, that mythical legend warrior, who you guys will know all about, but who, of course, was half divine. And when he was born, I think it was his mother, wasn't it, who dipped him in a divine river or liquid that basically made him invincible and made his skin, his flesh, impregnable, apart from the area where she was holding him, so she didn't drop him completely. She was holding him by the heel. So he had, that's where we get the expression Achilles heel from, his only place of vulnerability. And I think my reflection is that what we saw in lockdown post, you know, the pandemic kicking off, and we were all confined to barracks, to quote one of your phrases, military men, and were only allowed out to go shopping, or allowed out for one form of exercise a day. I think that brought us a shared experience like nothing in our lifetimes, and possibly nothing before. The fact that the whole world was in their homes, and we didn't know what the future looked like, and there was this sort of spectre stalking the streets, and ultimately the spectre of death, the one great enemy and man and woman's final frontier. And I think that brought a sense of the fragility of life and our own mortality and our vulnerability. And I think I can only explain it like that in that moment, God in his sovereignty, who loves us, who's always trying to get through to us, but most of the time we're impregnable, like Achilles. You know, most of the time people aren't interested. But in this moment of global, you know, challenge, our vulnerability has been revealed, and people are open, and it's like this arrow. Eventually Achilles got shot by one arrow that pierced, by Paris, I think it was, pierced his, go and watch Troy with Brad Pitt, pierced his heel, his one vulnerable point. And I think in this moment, what I experienced going around 64 streets and seeing all kinds of different people, getting hundreds of messages, people saying, I'm not religious, but I'm deeply moved by that, was seeing that somehow God opened people's hearts, that there was this chink in the armor, and that this arrow just sailed through this message of hope, this message of connection, that we're not alone, that we still have each other, but ultimately there is a God in heaven who loves us. And I always likened, like Psalm 23, the Good Shepherd, I've always likened coronavirus and COVID to being like a bad shepherd who bullies us, forces us into our homes, forces us out of community, and ultimately wants to steal, kill, and destroy. and wants to kill us, and that's the greatest fear of COVID, is death. But in this window, I think God's just opening people's hearts that, I was able to speak into that moment, and they were prepared to listen, perhaps in a way that people haven't before. So, and yeah, I only went out during lockdown because I sort of felt that window maybe closed a bit when we moved out of full on lockdown again, and we could move about more freely. That sense of invincibility begins to return, but it's always the preacher's job, it's always the minister's job to try and lovingly and gently remind people that, of course, we're not invincible, that all of us are, in jars of clay, and we are but dust, and our days ultimately are numbered, and we've got to find a hope that endures even beyond the grave. But perhaps more that in a moment.
Yeah, Pat, you talk a lot about the context of the last 9 months really playing a big part in how receptive people were to your message. But I don't want you to downplay the manner in which you personally engage with people, because I think there's a lot of lessons in there for other people in the church and for people outside the church, in business, in sport, whatever it may be. And you mentioned the church has tried many times to preach from the street. I remember being on a tube once, and quite a fanatical person was preaching inside a packed tube. And as you described, everyone kind of has their armor on, don't they? And they, on a tube anyway, no one likes talking to anyone or really making eye contact. And here was this guy preaching quite loudly, and the people right around him, they couldn't move, and it was a very awkward feeling. Would you ever stop and give advice to someone doing that? Perhaps you've seen this happen yourself in London. What advice would you give to someone preaching in that manner? And then how is what you're doing different?
Yeah. Very good question. And I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is I would never seek to, and not suggesting anyone in that tube was, I'd never seek to judge another person's calling or how they're going about things. I mean, there've been plenty of people who've questioned what I've been up to, ironically, mainly from within the clergy. So peers and colleagues of mine who've challenged things, who've written to bishops complaining about, like, why is he allowed to do this? Why is he doing that? We don't think it's appropriate. And that's just, I find that, anyway, that's a story for another day. I find that astounding. But I was doing it because I felt called to do it, that God led me to do it. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was just a thought, an idea that entered my head, knowing people couldn't gather in church, that people couldn't come to church. I thought, well, maybe church should go to the people. And so that simple idea of playing a hymn and a prayer came into my head. So I would always trust that this person who's in a relationship with God, who hears God's voice, is doing it because they feel led to do it. Now, one of my best friends, that is his ministry. He goes on the streets. He does incredibly bold, or in the eyes of the world, sort of foolish things that don't seem on the surface all the time to bring huge fruit. But his point would be, he does it because for the one. He does it just because there may be, and there may have been even on that day, one person in that tube carriage who heard that message and who responded, and whose life has been changed not only now, but for eternity. Because, of course, that's the message we believe, that God came to save us, and ultimately to save us from death and eternal death. So there's a deep conviction that people are led by, which I wouldn't want to sort of pour water on, but I think there are ways of doing it. And I think it's how we present the message. That, the message always stays the same, but the content stays the same. The packaging changes. So how are we packaging that message? How are we presenting it in a way that is as winsome as possible? And it could have been that if that person was on that tube carriage, but was a beautiful singer, imagine if they'd just sung out and it had just gripped everyone, and they'd used a gift, to open people's hearts, and then they'd shared a short thought on the back of it. That might have had more fruit. So I would always counsel look at the methods, look at the tone of voice, look at how you're, coming before people. Are you doing it with humility? Are you just doing it wisely, that, don't outstay your welcome? That's what I've learned from the portable priest. I'd always introduce it with like, I'm a vicar in the Church of England, i.e. I've got some semblance of reason and justification to be here. I'm only going to take 5 minutes of your time. It's a beautiful old hymn. We're praying for the NHS, i.e. look, guys, come on, let's just come together for a moment in these challenging times. So I try and get the tone of voice right. I try and get the message right, even as I included the unchanging message of the gospel, which I was probably the same thing in a way that the guy on the tube was sharing. So I think it's always about presentation and innovation of method. Even
Can I pick up on that point, Pat?
Yeah.
Actually, because I think you've raised a couple of points which I find fascinating there. I used to work in the communications industry for a short time, and communications is exactly as you say. It's about content, it's about reach, and it's about rhythm. And I was going to ask you this question today, actually, is the fact that when your content essentially hasn't changed, you have to innovate in terms of creating that reach, and of course, we're all used to the regular rhythm of regular worship as being that. So your key driver for success and to differentiate yourself is how you innovate that reach. But I was interested to hear you say that there were some people who were questioning your methods and in terms of why you were allowed to do that. I was going to ask you therefore a question on how empowered do you feel by the organisation that is the Church of England to innovate, given that I think we've all three of us established this morning there's been such a need to do so.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd want to say ultimately that I think the church recognises its need to innovate, to try new things, to do all that we can, recognizing we're creative beings made in the image of a creative God, and so the church is always supportive of new ideas, and the church, my bishops have been supportive of me. It's been an incredibly challenging time to manage and to steward, and to steward this thing that they saw happening, and with me going out in the streets and people responding, and yet there were guidelines. So at the start, I was going out in my car, and in conversation with my bishops, we decided, actually, let's make it your daily exercise, because that's in the guidelines. Driving, essential travel, debatable. Is it essential? I'd say it is. Eternal life, quite a big deal. But anyway, that's might be a difference of opinion. But we certainly got around it by like, okay, I'll do it as my exercise. I'll hire a tricycle. And I was cycling around, and it was my only form of exercise. And they were like, brilliant, do it like that. Other challenges, complaints came their way. Why is he doing it in this diocese south of the river? So it's like, okay, Pat, just stay north of the river. That's our diocese. We give you our blessing. Other complaints came like, does he have the permission of the local vicar whose patch is on there? To begin with, I hadn't, because it just was such strange times, and it just, the need to get out there and be bring a bit of hope and lift spirits was so big. So I hadn't. So
and Pat, it wasn't like you were bumping into other vicars also doing the same thing, right? You were the only person doing this.
No, that's true. But still, I guess there is an honouring and a respect of people's patch. I mean, I just turn it around and think, how would I have felt if word had reached me that someone had just been on Westbourne Grove doing the same thing, which is in my parish, without asking me. And it's like, it does rankle a bit. So the wisdom of my bishops in saying, look, just make sure you get permission of the vicar whose patch you're on. So there is always a blessing for innovation, because they recognized that God is doing something with this. We want to enable it to continue, but here are some guidelines. We've had enough of guidelines, haven't we? But here are some guidelines which has actually enabled it to flourish. And the church just knows, look, to reach people we're not reaching, we've got to do things we're not currently doing, and that's just a basic rule of thumb for any church leader and the church at this time. But obviously part of an ancient institution that has these ancient buildings, that has created, what do they say, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. And I think the lesson for the church at this time is, okay, we've been used to, meeting in these big pointy buildings that are cold and damp often, and but that are beautiful and inspiring. But that's not the only way to do church. In fact, it's not even how the church began, and in this time of being confined, to our homes, and needing to figure out how to do church online, we needed to learn new things. And actually the old tools, the way of doing it, let's meet in the big pointy building, hasn't been on offer, or wasn't for some months. So
I think it's fascinating you're raising exactly the same issues that Rita and I talked to in our day jobs, talking to large organizations who are saying, we used to have an office, and the office was very important. It was symbolic, and that's where people go. And I don't want to downplay what you're saying, because of course your message is a lot more than about making money. But I think when we look at education,
we make very little money.
Okay. When we look at education this year, young people now at university in their rooms doing Zoom calls. They're at university, but they're kind of not really at university. That level of innovation, I think there's lots of people can take inspiration from what you've done, respecting of the hierarchy that you're just not going to get past. And I think all organizations can probably mention that, but the need to innovate and to get through there. So
and my nice military link for you guys. Last night I watched a little documentary on Netflix, World War II's greatest moments, and I watched the D-Day landing, and just how to face the challenges of all the opposition and the obstacles put on the beaches. A slightly crazy inventor, scientist, was coming up with all these weird looking things to add to tanks to make them, be it floatable, so that they could launch and float and sort of have propellers onto the beach, or to make them able to cut through thick hedges in Normandy, or able to lay down, become a ramp for another tank. They had rail sort of tracks on their roof, go into a big ditch, and then other tanks would go. So innovation. And Max Hastings, the historian, was commenting and just saying, to face the greatest unique challenges that World War II brought, it needed an unprecedented level of innovation. And certainly, speaking from the church point of view, never have we needed greater innovation, as the statistics coming back, I just read a report this week, are, depressing in the extreme. If we didn't believe in a living God, and that Jesus had, defeated death and was on the throne, you would be depressed. I mean, it's all negative, percentage decrease in attendance. So, there's always the place of innovation. And the church has always been sort of at the forefront of a lot of innovation, founding schools, universities, hospitals, thinking of all this stuff, and cultural, the Renaissance, just patrons of the arts and that sort of stuff. So I think it's time, certainly a wake-up call for the church, as it is for all of us.
Pat, thank you for making that tank reference. As a former cavalry officer, I certainly appreciate that. And instantly, what sprang to mind is this quote, which I'm going to attempt to say now. I'll probably misquote it completely. It's from a tank commander in the Second World War, and he's talking about what it's like to be in combat, and he says words to the effect of, I'm talking to the driver on the A set radio, and I'm telling him to advance, but he's listening on the B set. He can't hear me and is reversing. The Browning machine gun is jammed. The other gun is unloaded. And as I see 12 enemy tanks break the tree line 500 meters from my position, someone hands me a cheese sandwich. And I think that really brings to light just the chaos and confusion of war. And perhaps there's parallels there to the chaos and confusion that we're all dealing with now, certainly the uncertainty. When you speak to people one-on-one, and the other day we talked about personal leadership and how you manage your mind effectively within this chaos and confusion. What advice do you give people?
I mean, you know, I am not wearing the dog collar today. Actually, had a day off. Actually, not that I wear it much at home at all. But I'm in this game, and I do what I do because when I was 18 years of age, I had an encounter with Jesus Christ. I heard a talk on the evidence for the resurrection, and I realized that, you know, the reason the church exists at all, you know, the reason so many people died for their faith is because actually the resurrection happened and that Jesus did come back from the dead. Now, that's the unique claim of Christianity, and that is the bedrock of our faith and of our hope. And as reflecting this morning, like, a real hope is one that isn't just a distract. You know, there's a difference between distraction and hope. I think people often talk about, like, oh, what have you got to look forward to? And it's like, okay, looking forward is fine, but then, you know, what about when we've got there and had those experiences, and then what are we looking forward to? And, you know, how are we going to lift our spirits? And ultimately, with that challenge, that final frontier of death coming our way, what can we look to beyond that? Is there hope beyond the grave? And of course, that is the message and hope of Christianity, that yes, there is. The God in heaven who made the world loves us, sent his son for us, died for us, but rose again. And we can be in a relationship with him. So I say all that because my life was transformed aged 18, hearing a talk, realizing, I think you're alive, Jesus. If you are, come into my life. And boom, the Spirit of God filling me, and me being a different person and having a different purpose in my life. And so when I speak to people one-on-one, all I can offer, and it's sort of humbling, and in a sense, in the eyes of the world, it seems so little, but it's everything. All I can offer is Christ. And all I offer them is the encouragement of, are you seeking God? Are you spending time with the risen Jesus Christ? Are you reading his word? You know, the scriptures, the Bible. Are you praying? You know, laying your requests at his feet, your worries, your burdens? Are you asking him to fill you with his life? Are you worshiping him? Are you putting your eyes on something else? You know, I think so much what's wrong with our world is our eyes are constantly on ourselves or on our businesses or on our families. And the joy of worship is you get to turn your attention outwards. And, you know, life should be worship, but you just fix your eyes on the one who is in control, and meaning we can relax, the one who is worthy of our praise. And so when I counsel people, all I can offer is, I can offer good tips, like, you know, the rest of us. I can offer distractions, like, oh, have you watched this World War II documentary? You know, it's fascinating. You know, that will perk up your evening. I can offer that sort of hope, that sort of distraction. But ultimately, I just point them to the one who I believe can really transform their life and all of our lives, and actually transform the world, the one who rules the world. So I try and help them walk with Jesus, you know, who we read in the Gospels, he walked with his disciples and with all humanity, and he welcomes all, and he's still walking the earth today. We can't see him, but he is with us, with any of our. Can you hear me?
Just got you back. Yes, I lost you for a second there. Just the most important part, I think.
Sorry, I started taking a phone call started coming in. That's what I would say. You know, I can only point them to the creator of it all, because that's the key. We'll never make sense of this life or rise to the ultimate challenges if we don't know who made the world, how he made it, and why he made it, and our part that we can play in it. So I always just point them to Jesus. It's a boring answer, you know. The Sunday school question is like, what's the answer? You know, the answer is always Jesus, whatever the question. So if you ever asked,
I think you. I mean, what I get from that, Pat, is, you know, you are able to make this connection, you know, incredibly well. And if I can take you to something I think I saw on a previous interview with you, and I think you'd been doing one of your open air services in a large congregation, and someone questioned you halfway through that, and yet you talked about the fact that God's presence was there. And I'm really interested to get, and again, it's the communicator in me, I think, that finds this absolutely fascinating. When you talk about witnessing God's presence amongst a congregation, you're talking about behaviors that you're reading off from people, as well as obviously what that you feel spiritually. When do you know that's happened in terms of people's behaviors? That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed on the BBC One papers round the story I had introduced with the headline saying that apparently going to church, is like taking drugs, or has the same effect as taking drugs. And so I was like, just want to confirm that that's absolutely the case. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday.
Yeah, I thought that was quite a brave call, actually.
No, but I did go on to say it's better than drugs because there's no come down. So what do I look for? The presence of God. It's talked about in the New Testament, the fruit of the Holy Spirit. When we have the Spirit in our lives, the fruit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Qualities. Who doesn't want those qualities? And lots of those qualities, when you feel God's presence, when you feel his peace, and that's what I was seeing again and again on the streets. That's what's amazing. We're used to seeing it in the big pointy building, the stuff we're used to, church buildings. But seeing it on the streets from people who would then write and say, I'm not religious, but, the service you just did had me in tears. I had goosebumps. I've got chills. What's going on? Yeah, that's God's presence.
I think that's really interesting. I think going back to Reese's story, and I love that sort of the comment you just made, which is, I think, probably describes most of the British public. I'm not religious, but and I think that's it's almost something it tracks to our natural understatedness sometimes. We don't want to absolutely admit that we are absolutely convinced to be thinking one way, and I wonder whether listening to what Reese was saying and you describing his story as well, that public preaching is something that invades British people's right to have a choice of who they're going to listen to, and if that's particularly important in our national psyche, because I don't think it's the same all over the world. We're naturally not very expressive people. I often talk to colleagues in the company that Reese and I work for, because we work for an American consultancy, and we say it's a bit like trying to sell a Broadway opening night in the West End on a Thursday night when it's raining, and it's very different. And do you think you're battling with that, with people's choice of whether to listen to you or not?
Of course, and people, exercise that choice all the time, and that's what the data is showing. In this report, that's pretty disheartening about Church of England numbers, dropping through the floor and year on year. But I guess it depends on, and most of the time we must respect people's freedom, and totally respect people's freedom to choose, and I come from a family of non-belief, like none of them are Christians. So I'm well aware that people regularly exercise that, like, I don't believe it, and I can't force them to believe it, nor would I. But all I would do is hold out the message, and, to be a preacher is to be a herald of good news. And there's certain news that, depending on its level of importance, must be heard by all. So the COVID restrictions, the challenges, the government needs to make announcements. It needs to make sure everyone hears them. And if it comes across someone in the street who appears not to be behaving in line with them, the police's job or authority's job is to gently inform them. Have you heard the news? These are the guidelines. You need to live by them. Now, of course, the government, ruler of the state, has the authority to do that, and rightly so. So the Christian point of view perspective would be, if we have news, if God has given a message to the world that he is saying, this is my invitation, but this is also my call and command, that you worship my son, Jesus Christ. He is the living one. He is the ruler of it all. He's the king. If he's given that message to the church to proclaim, then there's a responsibility to make sure that message is heard, no matter what flack we might get for it. And of course, down the ages, Christians have been persecuted and there have been martyrs. And even now, the 20th century had more martyrs in that one century than all the other centuries put together. But why is that? It's because not everyone wants to listen. And so they'll try and shut you up, even if they need to kill you to shut you up. But the church will keep speaking because it feels the message and the news is so important, and that they are called to make it known, no matter the opposition. So yeah, I put it on that sort of level. It's not easy, and yeah, you want to do it in as winsome a way as possible, but even when it's not desired, it still needs to be heard.
Yeah, Pat, one of the challenges that most organizations are dealing with now is one of engagement with their workforce, who probably are a big proportion are working remote. And when you remove people from the physical environment that they're used to, it does cause challenges with engagement. I certainly feel it myself. And a shout out to McChrystal Group, who Jerry and I work for. They place a great deal of emphasis on physically connecting with each other. We work for a consulting firm, around about 100 people in the firm. We're scattered across Europe and North America. But the company invested a lot of money in bringing people together for amazing experiences. Jerry and I went hiking in California last autumn, about a year ago today, actually. Fantastic experience. And in investing in that physical connection is incredibly important, I think. But we are starting to lose that now, and engagement of employees is an issue. You have a fantastic analogy about a coal in a fire. Could you retell that here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry, all my stories have sort of a Christian sort of link or
That's why we got you on, Pat. That's why you're here.
So it's the story of a young Christian. He's new to the faith. He's been excited, but some challenges have come his way, and he's sort of lost his confidence and slightly thinking he's losing his faith, and he stopped going to church over the last few months, a bit like during COVID. Perfect example during COVID. He hasn't been out, going to church. He hasn't been meeting with other Christians, and he's losing heart. And he goes to visit an older, wiser Christian. He's been, had the faith 50 years in his cottage in the countryside. And he sits down. The older man shows him to a seat by the fire, and they're both looking at this coal fire. And the old man is just staring into the fire whilst the young man gets this burden off his chest and explains what he's going through and how he's just not feeling the passion or excitement, or not feeling it's real anymore. And he explains what's been happening. And the old man listens and just looks at the fire. And when the old man stops talking, the old man picks up the tongs and reaches into the fire and takes a red hot coal that's at the center of it. And he takes it out and he puts it on the hearth next to it. And they just look at this red hot coal just slowly go orange, and then whatever color it goes after that. And then it goes gray, and eventually it goes black, and it's actually cold enough that you can pick it up with your hand. And once it's black, the old man takes the tongs again, picks up the coal and puts it back in the heart of the fire from where it came from. And within a few short minutes, that coal is just burning bright and glowing, sort of white hot once again. And that's the analogy. And I used it and shared it with our church family and wider sort of Instagram audience, just saying that's often what we experience. And certainly from a church perspective, when we don't gather physically, we can lose our fervor. We need each other. We're embodied human beings. I mean, that's what Christmas coming up is all about. God taking on flesh, because it's important to connect physically with one another. And so that's been hugely challenging, whether it's for the church or even, like you say, Reese, businesses, people working from home.
Great advice, and I love that story. I think that analogy is so important for anyone, actually, just to feel maybe to gauge their temperature of their piece of coal at the moment with whatever it is they need to engage in, whether that's an organization or their faith or their family or anything like that. I think it's a great story, perhaps a great one to end with. And we could talk all day, but I'd like to maybe just sort of bring out three things which I've really struck with me today, Pat. And notwithstanding what you do is amazing. But I think I wrote down three notes about what you said. We shape our tools, then our tools shape us. I think that's a real great lesson for everyone from any organization listening to us at the moment. And the world is being reshaped around those tools and us at the moment. So perhaps a really good point of reflection for that. I love the way you made a distinction between distraction and hope. And I think that's really something we could talk to as well. And I think you're very clear, and maybe I wasn't expecting this, but you're very clear on what the components of effective messaging are. And I suppose on reflection, it's pretty logical that you would be, isn't it? Really, because you're such a success. So listen, amazing what you're doing. I've loved talking to you. I'm going to finish up with one question and then hand over to Reese. And it tracks back to that tools thing and hierarchies. If you were the Archbishop of Canterbury, Pat, what would be your first priority right now?
Well, I think he's doing a fantastic job, in challenging times. I think his message is just to release, leaders where they are and local troops on the ground to get out and get amongst it. And I think the message should be visible. I've just taken to, even in the second small lockdown, just getting my dog collar on and going, making sure it's visible, and just going walking around the parish. Just even if I don't talk to anyone, and I do talk to people every time, but even if I don't and they just see me, I think it just speaks of hopefully hope in a more provocative way. I think it speaks of a bit of challenge about, gosh, that person believes in God. What do I think of God? But it's just being present with the lonely, with the hurting, and having eyes open. So I think the message should be to the church, as it always has been, the Great Commission from Jesus: go into all the world and make disciples. Get out there and be visible and be present.
Fantastic.
Pat, that's great. Thank you. And if he is listening, hopefully he takes that advice on board. But no, he's doing a remarkable job. Pat, thank you so much for coming on to the Tia Medals podcast. The portable priest, the portobello priest, the hot priest, Priestman Pat, I'll give you one more. The Archbishop of Canterbury. It's been a real pleasure. And we look forward to catching up maybe in a few months, maybe after Christmas, and we can reflect on how that's gone. Fingers crossed we'll be turning the corner by then, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening to the Tia Medals podcast, and we'll see you again soon.